Welcome to the YouTube Underdog TV version of the Functional Sportsaholic. This week, Sam Van Dam was off, so I was a one-man band. If you could give us a subscribe, we'd appreciate it. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at TFS_Sean. On this particular installment, we are talking Hard Knocks, and when I say we, I mean me, myself, and I. Let's join me up right now. But anyway, let's dig into Hard Knocks. So we're kind of in it. This episode kind of featured Antonio Brown. We've talked on this show ad nauseum about Antonio Brown, helmet gate, what's going on? Is it really his feet? Coward came out earlier in the week and said, he theorizes he had Antonio Brown's agent, Drew Rosenhaus, on his show and theorized, he didn't have any sources or anything, but he theorized that Antonio Brown was making a big stink about the helmet because maybe his feet weren't right. I don't really think that's the case. I've lost skin on my feet before. It sucks. You got to use the feet. It sucks if your feet hurt. But Antonio Brown seems to be okay. And I tell you, watching him run routes, he still looks pretty strong as a player. Our criticism of Antonio Brown on this show has never been about talent. It's been about attitude. He's being a little difficult with this helmet thing. But at the same time, if I'm an NFL receiver, right, you got to remember this. If you're wearing a football helmet, you don't have your full field of vision. You have a little window that you're looking through, and part of that window is covered by a cage, your face mask. So to change from one helmet that you're comfortable with to another one, another style, I can understand how that would be a little jarring. He exhausted all of his efforts. I'll be honest with you, I would probably have done the same thing. I think where Antonio Brown is kind of getting it right now, and I think I was a victim of this too, just, on my Twitter and everything. I think he's fallen victim to his, what he's put out there this past year in social media. And, all the drama in Pittsburgh, him getting traded, him popping up on other reality shows, that singing show on Fox, all that stuff. When you put all that stuff out there, it's so easy to criticize. And so there were points in the Hard Knocks episode. I think there was a time when, he was just like, everybody wants to criticize me. He was just basically a little pity party after a workout. I'm just going to put out the hard work. It's all work. It's no talk. Well, the dude was talking to the cameras. It's like, dude, if that's what it is, follow rookie Josh Jacobs' example and just avoid the cameras. You never see Josh Jacobs, who is a first-round pick. He has a lot of hype about him. You don't see him on Hard Knocks because he's avoiding the cameras. He doesn't want to be on the show. And so, Antonio Brown, he likes the spotlight. He is a little bit of a diva. I'm sorry he is. We'll see where he goes, but I'm not really loving, what I'm seeing from the situation. But I think from a talent point of view, I think he'll be fine. He's back at practice now with the other helmet. He's exhausted all his things. So if he leaves camp again, look, I already think it was an issue with him leaving the camp for the second time. But if he leaves camp again, I'm not, I just have some trepidation there, but let's pump the brakes and now we're in it. Now we're in camp. Let's see where we're going. Let's try to keep a positive point of view because I've thrown a lot of negativity at Mr. Brown this offseason. I also want to note Frank Caliendo, good for him. He kind of fallen back. I think he was doing the touring thing, but he must have been so happy when Oakland got picked to be on Hard Knocks, because then he could throw out, things on Instagram, things on Twitter of him doing the John Gruden impression. Wouldn't you know it, he popped up on this last episode of Hard Knocks doing the John Gruden impression, and it looked like he even made a joke like, I ran out of material 5 minutes ago. So good for Frank Caliendo. He got there. I hope he got paid for that, always get paid, right? Oh, I hope he got paid for that appearance, but good for him at least getting the publicity. Let's see. I noticed my least favorite safety in the NFL already. Abram was complaining about his Madden ranking. He went over to the Madden ranking and was complaining that his stats were too low. And I thought it was interesting because then you got Darren Waller, who is now, the hype is starting to lift off on him, which I'm a little disappointed by, frankly, because I was hoping that everybody would leave him unnoticed. But the hype is starting to lift off on him now. Hard Knocks featured him in this last episode. And what you saw from the Madden guys that went over to Waller, as they said, hey, you're at a 68 ranking. He's like, yeah, that makes sense. I haven't really put anything on tape or on the field yet. So, he was very humble about it. He's like, hey, I have to prove everything. Whereas rookie Abram was just talking about, hey, you gotta boost me up. I'm fast. I'm this. My coverage is great. My run support's great. Blah, 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 blah. It's just so tedious. So I continue to be, let's say, less than impressed on that safety. But I'm sure he's fine at it player-wise. I just hate watching him on the show. Speaking of Waller, I've thought, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, I've thought that we saw it last year in Oakland. John Gruden's system, it likes tight ends. If they have a tight end that can catch, that tight end will score in fantasy. And we saw him wide open in the game coverage. Glennon overthrew him at, I think it was the first quarter or something like that, but with the starters, overthrew him. Waller, he should have caught a touchdown pass. Later in the game, Gruden was even talking about putting Waller back in so he could catch a touchdown, but he'd already been pulled out. So the backup tight end, one of the reserves there, got the tight end on what would have been his route. But what we can glean from that as a fantasy community is that Oakland is still going to use the tight ends like Jared Cook was used last year. Darren Waller will be used this year. I can't say that he's going to reproduce what Cook did last year, but I think he's a better bet than not to do so. So he's somebody you can earmark in the later rounds of your draft still. Like I said, if you haven't drafted yet, if you're one of those teams that drafts around Labor Day, and my draft is on Labor Day this year. Unfortunately, hype's probably going to lift off. He's going to be a little bit more expensive than he would be now. But if you're picking this show up right now and you have a draft, hey man, Waller, round 13-ish or something like that, he's probably still going to be there for you. What else do we got? More work. Yeah, I was going to say Antonio Brown, more work, less talk. It would be nice to actually see him putting in work and talking less. So let me just throw that out there. Luke Wilson looks like a slightly younger version of Alice Cooper. Slightly younger, very weird kind of look. I think he needs to cut his hair. And hey, I like long hair. I'm a guy who had long hair my whole life before I lost it all. So I'm not one of these kind of old crew cut guys. But Darren Waller, he is not carrying those locks the way I would want those locks to be carried. And then lastly, Gruden talking. I just found it odd that Gruden, addresses his team about the preseason games like they're life or death. I don't know, if I'm a player in the locker room and I'm hearing him talk about, Green Bay's coming into town and this is a big blah, blah, blah. If I'm a starter, like, what do I care? I'm going to play like 2 quarters and then sit. To me, it loses a little bit of credibility. Now, if I'm a backup player and I'm fighting for a roster spot, yeah, that's a little bit more important, right? You're fighting for your life. You're fighting for your career at that point. You're fighting for a really, really healthy salary. And that's why I always find it kind of a bummer in the preseason when it's late in the game. There's probably let's say 6-7 minutes left. The game, it's pretty obvious that the coaches just want to get out there. And so the coaches, they'll put in like a 4th-string quarterback and then have that quarterback just continuously hand the ball off so that they kill the clock. I find that to be a really big bummer. And I know there's an injury concern, right? You don't want your starters to get injured. But at that point, when it's the 4th quarter and you got your 4 stringers in there, these players want to play and they want to put stuff on tape. And if you're an offensive lineman and your specialty is pass blocking, like you're a left tackle, you owe it to your players, I feel like, to put in-game competition and that tape together. If you have a 4-string quarterback, my gosh, let him throw, for crying out loud. Let him try to earn a spot. Let him try to put some tape out there for somebody else. It's a really big, but I think the coaches are doing these players a disservice because a lot of times, let's say you're the 4-string quarterback, you might get 20 snaps a week or something like that. You're certainly not playing with the first team. You might be playing with the scout team, might be throwing more, but you're throwing in non-contact drills a lot of the time. Let them play against real competition and put some tape together for these people. We see it with kickers. For some reason, they let the kickers kick. They let like a 3rd-string kicker, kick all game long, but they won't let a 4th-string quarterback throw the ball and try to earn himself a career. It's a real bummer. And this is a PSA out there for you NFL head coaches. Let your players play, man. Let your players play. You're not really risking much with an injury to a 4th-string tackle, to a 4th-string guard. And believe me, these players want to put tape on tape out there for their agents and for other clubs to maybe claim them off of waivers and give them a shot if they don't make your team. So, boo for you head coaches out there. All right, and that concludes the YouTube installment of Episode 3 Hard Knocks Commentary. This has been Sean Ryan. If you give me a follow on Twitter, I'm at TFS_Sean. You can also subscribe to our YouTube clip, which we would appreciate, so we can grow this thing. And, of course, we're going to be unleashing some real video content, not just this me talking and podcast stuff. We're going to be unleashing a lot of new stuff, a lot of fantasy-driven stuff. So keep an eye out, subscribe, and let us grow. Go out, be good, everyone.